like to introduce you to my panel now. So obviously our focus today is going to be technology in sport, with a particular focus on women. And obviously there's three verticals to this really. There's technology itself, then there's technology in sport, and then there's clearly technology and how it impacts on the female athlete and women working in that space. So as a starting point, I'd like to introduce you to our four esteemed panellists, and I'll start with HEBA, if you want to let everybody know who you are and what you do.
So good afternoon. I hope everybody awake after... Oh, can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. My name is HEBA BEVAN. I'm the CEO and founder for UTTERBERRY. We are a spin-out company out of Cambridge University. We've been going for over 11 years. We monitor major infrastructure like Crossrail, Tideway, and internationally like Singapore Land Transport Authority, currently in Australia. We concentrate on AI and harnessing the data that we get. We worked as well with sports, so we worked very closely with George and Ascot, and we worked as well with the rugby team and some of the Premier Leagues and ECB, England Cricket Board Association, and we would love to work with you on hopefully developing the stadiums and how to harness the AI and the data within your assets.
Good afternoon. My name is NAIDOO. I'm CEO and founder of Swiss Quality Events, and today I'm here on behalf of the International eSport Federation, where I'm responsible for partnerships. But I'm a quick insight onto my background is my background is a traditional sport athlete. I changed the WiMENA to, I would say, YSA, because I'm from South Africa, half South African, half Swiss now. And some of the challenges we spoke about earlier in this room about being female, non-white, growing up in Africa during apartheid. So I faced many challenges in traditional sport. And what I can say is where most of you mothers here are saying to your girls, you can do it, I was told you cannot do it. And I was just told that because my mom knew the barriers that I would face and how difficult that was going to be. But, you know, with the support of a few European volleyball players that came from Belgium and some from Mauritius, I played underground volleyball where I wasn't caught by the police for playing with white athletes. And for me, it was a benefit because I had access then to good coaches. But where this took me was, although I was told I could not play professional sport, I needed a career. I then studied civil engineering, which was the career. But my love for sport and my passion for sport pushed me to continue, and although I wasn't getting first place and winning gold medals, I managed to capture the camera, and I realized at a young age that there's a lot of business opportunity in sport and working with commercial partners, which took me on to managing the contracts for Coca-Cola with FIFA, Olympics and UEFA, and I also then worked with McDonald's children's program, South Africa World Cup, Beijing Olympic Games, and my engineering background then took me back into sport, where I began working with Dow when Dow became an Olympic partner, procuring materials into venues, sport venues, working on the Olympic venues for London, Tokyo, and Rio. And finally, I was asked to teach at the Academy of Sports Science and Technology, sport partnerships, and during this time, I did a lot of research work to better understand what's the future of professional athletes, where are they going to in the future, and also to better understand why there were no jobs for Olympians, what happens to these athletes in their careers. And while touching on that point, I came up to why there's so few youngsters playing sport, and I saw the shift between traditional sport and esports. And at that point, I began doing 3 research studies with master's students on the shift of youth from sport into esport, and which led me to being on the board of the International eSport Federation, as well as the North American the NASEF, the Sports for North American Scholastic Esport Program, where we work with a lot of youth and better understanding the gap between parents and kids, as well as how governments can address this issue and why is there such a mass transition of our youth into esport. And today I will pretty much be able to help or understand or answer your questions on this topic, I hope.
Hello everybody, my name's Jenny Price. I'm an expert advisor with PORTAS Consulting. You have a big practice in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia, and I've had the pleasure of working there since 2019 with PORTAS, specialising in participation projects in particular and projects touching on women's participation. And I guess the expertise I draw on to help me with that is 11 years as Chief Executive of Sport England. So I began that role in 2007. We've talked a lot about rugby, and it struck me as I was listening to that when I began in 2007, the Women's Rugby Union was run from a porter cabin in the Twickenham car park. And the first time I went to see them, I was utterly horrified by that. And one of the things that I really focused on doing was getting them out of the porter cabin and into the main offices. But about halfway through my life at Sport England, when I had really got myself established in the job, I started to work much more on women's participation in sport and getting more women involved at all levels, including governance. And as I embarked on that, a very, very senior man said to me, "Jenny, you're the first female CEO of Sport England. Do you really want to be identified with women's issues?" And I went home that night and thought, do I? And I came back the next morning and said to him, yes, I do. And I'm really, really glad I did.
Hello everyone, David HASSAN's my name, and I'm an academic, and for the last 2 years I've been working with the FIA, about whom you've heard quite a bit today, and they're of course the world governing body for motorsport, and in particular leading research around the United Against Online Abuse initiative, which is a coalition of some of the leading sports governing bodies around the world, and in fact national governments, with this common ambition of eradicating online abuse, with a particular emphasis, it should be said, on women. And that's important because the genesis of that initiative, United Against Online Abuse, actually came from the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulaim, who was appalled at the death threats that some of the female officials working on Formula One were receiving. And that actually led to him instigating this initiative, which I'll maybe speak a bit more about later on, George.
Okay, I'm kind of aware of the fact I haven't told you who I am, actually, but I wanted to let my enamoured panel go first. So just very briefly, I'm George Vaughan. I'm CEO of the Digital Line. My background is in cross-sector technology. So I was head of technology at Ascot Racecourse, where I did a transformative project there over a 5-year period. I've also worked at Twickenham Stadium, where I did a similar role alongside the Olympics. And I have different verticals across retail and education that I'm also involved with. So what we're going to discuss first is currently the big hot topic in technology, and that's artificial intelligence. It's probably the most transformative piece of technology that's going to come in front of everybody over the next decade. And to be fair, probably most of us are engaging with it already on a daily basis. Alongside what this might mean for women in particular in sport, it's interesting. I've often pondered over what it's going to mean to us as human beings. So for the first time in 20,000 years of evolution, we're not going to be the first most intelligent reference point on the planet. And once artificial intelligence overtakes that capacity with us, how are we going to deal with that as human beings? How are we going to deal with that across multiple different variants of our lives? So, HEBA, I know this is a specialisation of yours. If we start on that subject, what are the challenges, as somebody who's worked extensively in artificial intelligence, what are the challenges both being a woman in this environment and also specifically around sport?
So I'm an electronics and computer engineer, and probably most of you use mobile phones. So my actually first job was designing central processor unit, which is basically the brain for every single mobile phone for a company called ARM, a British company. I worked in Cambridge, then I got a transfer to California, working on massive kind of deployment and enhancement that came into smartphones from a normal phone to smartphones. The things is what we see, and in UTTERBERRY, what we do is low-power wireless sensor network, as well with artificial intelligence and machine learning at the edge. When I graduated from engineering, I was the only female engineer. And unfortunately, even until today, especially in electronics and computer engineering, very, very minimal amount of female. I'm a STEM ambassador. And one of the things which is we really need to enhance that type of sciencey, math, physics that we get attracting young female. So it's very challenging when most of the what we see right now in terms of formulas, in terms of AI, is being written mainly by men, which is gets skewed in one part rather than the others. So if it's been having the two opinion, we will have a different type of outcomes. And just to give you kind of a hint on things. So FIA, they actually, most of Formula One drivers, they are attracting huge amount of female-based fans rather than a male-based fans. The reason for that, because most of the marketing people are females. So the way they are writing their kind of script for their drivers to actually be attractive to female drivers. And instead of concentrating on the car, how powerful, the features on the car, how to get faster, which is as most of boys, and if you have a son, they are interested in that part rather than, oh, how attractive is the driver, where you will see there is a huge kind of lift on female interested in that sport, which will push more engineering as well aspect, and female interested in the engineering prospect in that field. The other things as well, which is we could see in the other hand, it's if we look at Shakespeare, if we look at how Charles Dickens have written, the way they write their script is very male, however attracted more female. So to read their books. And if we look at universities, even in the UK, my college in Cambridge accepted, the first female got accepted in 1979, which is nearly 40 years ago. So it's not long, actually, in that time where things start changing. And if we look at university, it was only male able to go into universities, and that has changed. So since that has changed, the subject that we have and how we teach things has been as well, it hasn't been changed dramatically. It's still very focused on how male teaches and do things. And we take that even for a younger age, like how we teach children. If you have a daughter and a son, they are, and I am a mother, you will see the way their behavior on learning things is very, very different. So for females, we actually get very, very slower in getting something, get us interested in. And once we are interested in, we actually excel because we've got a kind of an attention to repetition, and we want to complete, where male have to swing from one thing to another.
So would you say then, and I'll throw this out to NALAIN and to Jenny, would you say then obviously one way to have to combat this potential bias within the technology is to in some way recruit or encourage women into this field more often?
Definitely for bringing, especially AI, because it needs to be half and a half. You need to have the two genders putting the input in that.
But if I can, because I know we talked about this earlier, Jenny, so there are positive aspects to the deployment of artificial intelligence. I know that sometimes it gets a negative picture, but there's a lot of benefit that can come from this deployment. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to be really clear that I am not the technical expert on this panel, as you probably noticed. But what I'm interested in is what AI can do and what technical innovation can do for women in sport. And I think analysis of data, we had that fantastic presentation from Jacqueline and that enormous amount of data. There is no way that we can analyse that quantity without artificial intelligence. It allows us to do things so quickly, so effectively, to go to places where previously we've had to make choices. So we just look at the mainstream data or the most popular data, and guess what? Most of that is male-dominated, or most of that is European or North American-dominated. And it is fantastic to see the breadth of analysis that you get. The example that I was giving to George and to a couple of other people I spoke to was that I'd also really like to see AI deployed much more in personalised design, because I think the whole theme of personalisation is incredibly important. And as we know, the dominant profile in sport is the male profile. So it was a real wake-up call for me when my granddaughter started playing football at the age of 8 and is still playing it at the age of 16. And she has never had a pair of football boots that are anything other than what is politely described as unisex. In other words, they are male football boots, just in the right size. And I cannot believe that the enormous amount of technology, design capability that's out there, that we cannot design football boots, other forms of kit, from the bottom up for women and girls. And I see AI and technology generally as being a massive enabler of that. And it's particularly relevant, I think, to the region we're talking about now, which is a youth-dominated region, a massively technically enabled region, and I think they could teach us a few lessons.
Do you have a view on this, NALAIN, yourself?
I find with the e-sport, it's 50-50. And I think there are as many women gamers as there are male gamers, where I find that we need to actually increase the numbers, because in terms of developers, coders, in the UK is approximately, and I know HEBA, we disagreed on this last night because my numbers are a little bit higher than hers, and I said it was about 24% of women working in this area. And I think I could be wrong there, but also when it comes to gaming, it's very difficult to actually identify whether it's male or female.
Well, that's an interesting point. I was going to address that a little bit later, but you've kind of prompted me now. There are a number of sports out there where gender is irrelevant, okay? And esports is one of them. And I think if you can give us a little bit of context to your view on esports, that will lead me into a couple of questions I've got for David afterwards. But just generally speaking, it is an equal playing field when it comes to men and women, girls and boys.
It's absolutely equal. And the interesting thing is about gaming is that a lot of gamers play with anonymous, and of course, the only difference we find is that when it goes into competition, the number of females that go into competitive gaming is far less than male gamers. But in terms of actually playing, it goes across the age spectrum, and there's absolute gender equality in any of the games. But you do find that there are more male gamers on the I would say more the violent games, and women on more the softer games. Right. That, yeah.
So, because we're on the subject of esports and also technology, I thought we'd bring ChatGPT into this conversation. So what I did was ask ChatGPT what it thought was the most relevant question for women in sports in general. And this is what ChatGPT came back to me with. Basically, the question to ask you, David, and all the panelists, what steps can be taken to utilise technology to protect female athletes from online harassment? Now, this is something that it picked out as a key vertical in my question, and abuse. And how can sports organisations and social media platforms work together to create a safer digital environment for women in sport? And that leads on to what you were, from what you were saying about the anonymous gamer can sometimes hide behind that anonymity. So I'll pass it over to you.
No, thank you, George. I mean, obviously, social media is ubiquitous, isn't it? I mean, there's probably people here who are using social media just as we speak. And so it has got a lot of positive aspects, obviously. It brings us into the company of people who are like-minded and who share a common passion, in this case around sport. But what we're interested in, regrettably, is the extent to which social media is also used as a platform for the expression of hate speech. And in actual fact, that term online hate has expanded to something that we now call online harm, because of course not all abuse online is necessarily hateful or meets the definition of hate. But what concerns us, and we incidentally carried out quite a detailed survey of the partners that we work with, what concerns us is the extent to which people are put off engaging in sport as a result of online abuse. And in actual fact, a lot of the governing bodies that we spoke to said that this was their number one concern. So it's not only people who are currently participating, it's also future participants. And there's a load of data that substantiates that perspective. For instance, when I say we, I mean the FIA. The FIA partner with Arwen, who are an artificial intelligence company. And in fact, a range of big governing bodies do broadly similar type work. And what Arwen do for the FIA is essentially it removes that type of online abuse or hate speech that you might otherwise engage if there's not the degree of artificial intelligence engagement that would be the case with the FIA. And what we found as a result of that is significant increase in the level of engagement, particularly by women. Because the reality is that more than 2/3 of people say that they are put off or they remove themselves from an online environment where they detect harm or where they're concerned about. They simply remove themselves, very often silently remove themselves. Whereas if you can reverse that, if you can remove that type of online hate speech that people see, needless to say, the opposite effect is true. And Arwen's work for the FIA, you might be interested to know, has increased the level of engagement online by 56%. And also, you know, if we almost summarize some of the things we've heard already today, firstly, some of the countries where there's a majority female spectatorship and fandom are also some of the biggest countries in the world. So women represent future, I would suggest, the growth of sports fandom. But they are also, as I've indicated, very often the target of online abuse. So you can see at a whole range of different levels why governing bodies of sport need to be concerned with the extent to which women, in particular women and girls, may be put off engaging in their sport and particularly through their social media channels.
David, can I ask a bit of a controversial question? Do you have the data to say where that abuse is coming from? Is it coming from other women or other men?
That's difficult, obviously, because I mean it's an interesting point, George, because of the vast majority of the accounts, of course, are anonymised, but you might also be interested to know that through artificial intelligence and I wonder even if you need artificial intelligence, more than 90% of those anonymised accounts, the people behind them can in fact be detected. Yes. And we've seen some evidence of this recently with World Rugby, who have successfully prosecuted people who have abused online some of their match officials. And the interesting thing is that they were posting from anonymised accounts, but it was possible to detect who they were, and as I've indicated, they were prosecuted actually in Australia, successful prosecution. And some people might say, well, it's one thing to identify this online abuse, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I think certainly, aside from the regulatory environment, it's also prosecutions will begin the pushback against this type of abuse. So maybe I'll leave it there and let others come in, George.
Jenny, do you have a view on this?
Yes, because in one of my roles, I chair the International Tennis Integrity Agency, which looks after anti-corruption and anti-doping. So we have an enormous amount to do with the thousands of professional tennis players that are out there. And they definitely suffer an inordinate amount of abuse online, exacerbated by the fact that tennis is heavily bet on, and an awful lot of that abuse comes from frustrated gamblers. But it doesn't come on, why did you lose that point? It manifests itself in really unpleasant personal abuse. And I think what's particularly damaging about social media abuse is it's right here in your hand. And the vast majority of our tennis players do not travel with large entourages. They are on their own in 3-star hotels at night, and that's when they see those really horrendous messages. So it can be unbelievably damaging. And these are often very young people and young women. And the women definitely get an extra dimension, an extra quantity, and an extra dimension, which is visceral. And it was really interesting to hear Jackie talk about how women want to be in an inclusive environment and they want to see all shapes and sizes, levels of ability, all the rest of it. Believe me, in the world of online abuse, it is the precise reverse. It strikes at everything which sits behind your confidence, your self-belief. So I think the work that David does and some of the governing bodies are doing is incredibly important. And I think it will be massively important in this region, in the Middle East, where young people are literally live their lives on social media. So we have to do something about that. And it may be an unpopular view, but I fundamentally believe that the social media companies have an enormous responsibility here. Federations, individual athletes, entourages can only do so much. If the power of the social media companies is not engaged to tackle this properly, then I think what we can do ourselves is always going to be limited. And I think they have a social and moral responsibility to do that.
Agreed. I think, NALAIN, you want something to add here, yeah?
You know, I say, for this is one of the many points why we're actually asking ourselves today, why are our children playing e-sport? And again, a lot from social media. So when you're gaming an e-sport, nobody's looking at your body type, nobody knows whether you're male or female. You're absolutely comfortable in your skin because you're sitting privately in a room. Of course, you're losing the physical connection, but you're still speaking, you're still communicating, and I think the importance is that parents should, if you really want to understand why your kid's spending so much time behind a screen with his friends, connecting, communicating, and gaming, it's actually an environment where they're absolutely comfortable. And when it comes to male-female abuse in esports, you find it's only when the person is revealed as being female and the loss is not taken too well by the counterpart, then you get kind of the verbal abuse. But outside of that, I would say it's pretty equal. And I think that's another shift why there's so many young people moving into esport. They feel much safer behind a screen than actually getting to a sport field and being judged by the way they look. And they may not be the gold medal. They're the if you're not, you're the loser. But in an e-game, there is so much that you can benefit from it. You know, nobody's actually criticizing you. You're improving your STEM skills, coding, and I have to say, you know, if you look at, we're talking male-female here, and I'm shifting the topic a little bit to a more positive note. If you look at most of the big tech companies, and the founders behind it, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, they've all been gamers. And with more girls going into gaming, I'm actually saying they're actually getting closer to STEM education. It's actually opening up the competitive zone for jobs, future employment. And that's going to lead, I think, to the next question, which is
well, I was going to say, actually, so I think that esports sometimes gets a bad rap. And we talked about this earlier. I mean, I personally don't see the difference between somebody spending 8 hours practicing a game they want to win at to somebody who sits for 8 hours and is doing admin work or doing accounting. So it's very, very similar. You have to kind of judge those parameters in their own verticals. But in terms of, do you have a view on esports yourself?
So I used to be a gamer and I had to stop, but I wouldn't tell my child, oh, esports is better than actual sport, because you want them to be healthy. And one of the things about sport, it is related to health. It doesn't matter who you are. All of us, we could actually do some sport. I can sit here and just move my arm, and it actually is healthy. And I think one of the things which is we're trying to encourage the younger generation to get attracted, not just because I want to win a medal. it's actually bringing an activity to their life, which is very important. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl or a man or a woman. I think all of us need to have a full participation from everybody.
I think there's no question exercise is hugely important. I find it a bit of an irony in that that the very technology that we're looking to promote is also the very technology within, that we're looking to put protective boundaries in there as well. So when we talk about technology in sport, going back, not that I want to demonise continually social media, but I do find that this playground, which is now the source for more people to get their news and their information, which isn't always very well regulated or tested or authenticated, I think it offers good, but also really some really harmful issues that we need to. And I don't know whether we need to lay the blame solely on the social media companies. I think it's, you could argue that you don't blame the gun manufacturer if somebody pulls the trigger. However, having said that, there's lots of mechanisms, right, within how they structure their platforms, which play into the weaknesses that a lot of people encounter. Just in terms of looking at artificial intelligence and looking at general technology, it feels to me as though that there are opportunities here to make life better through these various platforms. And I think we shouldn't knock the fact that esports, as an example, is a social experience as well. I mean, I've played online. I'm a gamer. I'm still not afraid to say that. And it is a social experience. It's just a different social experience. And I think sometimes when you get to a certain, a certain age, you might look back on things and say, well, actually, that doesn't feel right. But it might not feel right for me, but it probably feels really right for my son or for my grandson or whatever, yeah? Do you have a view on that kind of progression of technology yourselves as a panel?
One thing I would, just very briefly, George, in relation to that, I mean, one thing I do think is an emerging trend, although it's frankly been around for a little bit of time at this stage, is the extent to which sport is presented online, but particularly in the social media world. And what that has meant for us who consume sport via social media is that there's been a significant reduction in the amount of time that we are prepared to watch sport for. So, and I think an interesting trend for the future, I know maybe we'll come on to that discussion, is the impact of the way that sport is mediated, in other words, particularly through social media, the impact it actually has on, let's say, real sport. Because I think what we're going to see is changes in how sport itself is played, presented, engaged with, precisely because of the impact of social media and I suppose more broadly our propensity to look for things that are much shorter and briefer than would have been the case heretofore. So I think that's an interesting.
That's a really good point. I've seen it in a lot of research work I've done. You see attention spans shortening, and you see sports like cricket, for instance, that are doing the 100 game. I mean, that's clearly there to encourage an audience that maybe doesn't want to be there all day. And in fact, I did a piece of research a couple of months back, and one of the things that was really quite, which was pinpointed, was around Gen Z, and the fact that around 45% of them in the US didn't go to live games because they thought they were too long.
Can I say something about that? Which is, I'm actually fascinated in Saudi Arabia. They've taken boxing in a different level, where they have boxing really late at night, making it accessible for European market, US market to actually view that. If you look at the social media before that, and it's really capturing more people watching the upcoming kind of events rather than actual events. And I think the more we are comfortable to think is part of our society, is part of our income, is resources, which is basically sports, and happen as well in Formula One. We see it as well in the circuits and all that kind of the way it's being taken. The more that is becoming a pathway, the more there is a need regulation and a protected, and the government will take active approach because that is a resource, so it needs to be protected and the people around it as well.
From an age perspective, what I could say is that's where I think esport actually surprised me. you know, we put so much focus on the physical ability, but as we get older, we are limited with our movement and knee surgery, hip surgery, etc., and we also forget about our mental state. And research has also proven that from 80% of gamers are less likely to have Alzheimer's than non-gamers. And what I also find interesting about gaming is that when you're in your 60s, 70s, and actually there's on YouTube, if you Google oldest esport team, there's a lovely link that will take you to a Swedish team, and they've been gaming together for approximately 40 years, and they still play competitively. It's one female and 3 men. They meet regularly, and a learning from that is that it's teamwork, it's gender equality, and it also keeps your mind alive and alert. So we should be paying as much attention to our mental state as well as our physical state.
I think that, well, we shared a story earlier about our respective parents, in the fact that, you know, my mum's 80 and she spends more time on social media and on her iPhone and on her tablet than my nephew does, who's 18. And I think we sometimes forget that 40 years ago, you know, the first real games consoles started to evolve. And some of those people that were playing them now may be in residential care. And so they still have an expectation of that technology. But it's an example of how something that is mainstream can have an impact in other areas.
I'm going to add, sorry, quickly. The IOC started 2 years ago, and they began to focus on esports. Actually not esport, it's virtual sport. And I'm sure most of you in the room are aware of Swift or Peloton or virtual rowing. So there's a lot of virtual sport out there. And where this is going is a lot of the sporting federations are losing youth to gaming, and what's happening is that these youngsters are now playing virtually. So they're virtually competing in rowing and FIFA game, FIA. So what's happening is if you've not had access to doing it physically, you're now going from an e-sport or virtual game back into the physical game, because it actually inspires you to actually try it out. And we find more and more international federations are using e-sport to bring back the youth to actually doing physical sport. So
I think it's a really smart way of doing it, yeah.
I think as well, George, the extent to which technology can enhance fitness through wearables, that kind of thing. I mean, anybody who's got an Apple Watch cannot fail to be preoccupied with the number of steps that they do and have I closed my rings today. But that's a really positive side of technology, and the fact that you can now join Strava, that you can run a marathon against your friends in the US or all around the world. And I think the more the younger generation are engaged in that way, there's a lot of chat in federations now about how do we gamify sport, how do we use technology to make it a really inclusive and exciting experience. The more you can have it on your wrist, in your pocket, and it enhances the activity that you do, the better. While I've got the microphone, can I just segue onto one other positive piece of social media? Because we've heard a lot about mental health issues today and also about athlete voice. And I just wanted to give a shout out for what technology and social media in particular has done to the voice of the athlete. Because the power traditionally in sport has rested with the people who run it, who organise it, the people who own the rights, and very occasionally a team captain. And social media has really turned that on its head. So on the train down yesterday, I thought I would do a bit of research, and because tennis is the sport I watch most of all, I was really taken by the fact that the International Tennis Federation, which would say it is the global voice for tennis, has 300,000 followers on Instagram. And Serena Williams, so general star, extraordinary woman and leading tennis player, has 17.2 million. And if you think what that has enabled her to do for women, for black women, for tennis, for the power of the player against an official or a setup, that is extraordinary and, in my view, a very, very good thing.
No, it's a very good point to highlight, yeah. And in terms of that conversation around women in sport in particular, I think emerging technologies, I think artificial intelligence in particular, will go some way to actually being able to accelerate so that we do have that equality, because we don't have it. We are moving towards it in certain areas. I've been certainly taken by the huge uptake and interest in women's football, for instance, right? And then a lot of that's been led in the UK, certainly by the success of the England team, but also by at club level. And then going back to esports, you see that the games manufacturers now are ensuring that they've got female players and female teams in those games as well. So I think there is a progressive movement. What would you see each of you as being, the consistent and continual challenges still to women, just generally in sport? Do you have any views specifically around that? Anyone?
I mean, I'm happy to start because I spent 11 years worrying about this at Sport England. For me, it's all about belonging. Do we belong in this space? Do we belong in this space when we go out for a run at my great age, when we go onto the pitch at Wembley, when we pick up a racket at Wimbledon, and guess what? We might not be in the most advantageous slot in the scheduling. I think that belonging in sport for women is still a really big thing. And it is actually debates like this, inspiring people like this, that do give me some hope for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two areas, access and inclusion. And the reality is that sports technology that we've been discussing up until relatively recently, and I think the points being made, has almost neglected women. And so I noticed it was quite a huge story earlier this year whenever Garmin announced the dedicated female heart rate monitor, and we're seeing other examples where there's dedicated technological advances for women's sport, but they are noteworthy still because they're deemed to be exceptional. So I think those were the opportunities. I also think around predictive AI. I was having a discussion earlier with someone regarding the extent of anterior cruciate ligament injuries, particularly for female athletes, and the use of AI around predicting the propensity that some athletes may have towards those ACL injuries clearly can play a role in preventing them actually materializing, to say nothing about personalized training routines, again a role for AI in that regard. So I think there's a number of opportunities actually, George, around.
I'm hugely optimistic. I mean, what's your view?
I'm absolutely optimistic, and coming from where I've been to where I am now, I believe the glass is half full. And with youth and sport, I've even seen in esport in the Boulevard in Saudi Arabia. I had the honor of being invited there by His Royal Highness last year, and it was wonderful to see the number of young boys and girls together with their mums out in the evening playing a whole range of sport, from virtual sport as well as e-sport. And I don't see that there should be a problem in this. What I would like to see from this is that more girls take the tech side and use this knowledge from gaming to go into coding, and it opens up a whole array of jobs for the future for the girls that are actually gaming, and I hope that this changes the gender gap.
And that kind of segues really nicely into you, because you're one of those people that's done it.
Yeah, so I agree. And I think it's accessibility, as you said, but some sports, especially here, like just buying the kits for a child is enormous. And I think just to make sure these kits available to every single person and every single child, I think is important. So that is quite important for them to have the ability to be part of the sport and not having the kit hinder them for not being part of it. Okay, so on that note, because we were quite pressed with time, we're going to wrap things up here. We won't do questions, but if anybody wants to come and speak to any of the panellists, they'll be around for a while. But thank you anyway for your time.